In a world filled with moral shades of gray, Michael Lee is one of the few characters that is able to hold on to his moral convictions and values longer than most others in the show. When we first meet Michael, he's just another corner kid hanging around with his friends, which include Randy, Naaman, and Dookie. In a scene that happens soon after we meet the kids, we get deeper insight into the personalities of each of the boys, and right away we can tell Michael is on a different wavelength than the other kids. In this scene where the boys are trying to catch pigeons, Michael's leadership abilities are on display. Michael and Randy are near the trap working, with Michael being the one to manage the cord, and Dookie is off by himself doing his own thing but still part of the group. Naaman arrives soon after with more kids, including Donut and Kennard, but he places himself right next to Michael and immediately inserts himself into the conversation by complaining and acting like he knows what he's talking about. After a brief back and forth, Michael tells Randy and Naaman to quiet down or they'll scare the birds. Naaman still continues to complain. Finally, when it seems like they're ready to finally catch a bird, Dookie blows up a bottle and scares the birds away. In a fit, Naaman rushes Dookie and makes fun of him, but Dookie surprisingly claps back, which initially stuns Naaman and causes everyone else to laugh at him. This leads to some weak insults from Naaman, followed by a hissy fight between the two of them. Michael steps in and easily breaks it up and chides both of them for acting like fools. So why is this scene so important for the rest of the show, especially for Michael? Because we instantly see the pecking order or hierarchy in play, and it gives us a great look at how Michael, even from a young age, has influence. It gives us insight into who he truly cares about, how he manages conflict, and how he asserts himself. Michael never actually sets himself up as a leader in this scene. Others just naturally follow his lead, even though he's just part of the group. Remember, he's joining in with Randy's idea to catch birds, but he's the one that ends up controlling the trap. Randy is right next to him, sort of showcasing that he's Michael's right-hand man and closest friend. Naaman is a pretender. He places himself right next to Michael and immediately inserts himself into the scene and tries to assert himself with dominance. He talks loudly and acts like he knows what he's talking about, but the only one out of the group who even acknowledges what he is saying is Randy, up until Michael tells both of them to quiet down. After Dookie disrupts their plan, Naaman is the first one to challenge him, stating Dookie just cost them money. Remember, catching birds for money wasn't even Naaman's idea. In fact, he didn't even know they were catching birds for money until a few minutes earlier, but he's the most vocal and upset. In other words, Naaman is doing what Naaman will do for the rest of the show, posturing and projecting. When Michael steps in, the fight stops and everyone goes their way, save for Dookie, who stays behind, but we already see that Michael doesn't get caught up in pettiness, nor does he have tolerance for those picking on people who can't protect themselves. In a scene that lasts just a few minutes, it sets a tone for a character that will affect many other characters in the rest of the show. We see very early on, Michael has an issue with adult males due to his past abuse he suffered from his brother Bug's dad. Michael hardly ever looks an adult male in the eyes. He always turns away and sort of shrinks. His shoulders hunch, his head goes down, and he stares at the ground. Children who have suffered from sexual abuse exhibit many of the behaviors Michael does, including change in mood or personality. Notice how he can go from being really happy around his friends to completely somber in the blink of an eye when around certain adult males. Decrease in confidence or self-image. Again, this goes back to the way he tenses up around men. Loss of interest in school activities and friends. We see this off and on throughout the show, especially as Michael becomes more and more invested in the drug game. Before we continue on, I do think it's important that we talk about the issue of sexual abuse in boys because it will give us an insight into perhaps why Michael feels his back is against the wall when he is forced to face Bug's father again. Studies show that 1 out of 6 men have been sexually abused in their life regardless of whether the victim was white or black. Regarding that, we have to remember that sexual abuse of males is vastly underreported. 14% of all young victims of sexual assault are male. Among African Americans, homophobia can perpetuate the denial of sexual abuse in children. In 95% of cases, the victim was related or acquainted with the offender. Most child predators tend to operate in silence and victimize more than one person. So while we are talking about a character in a show here and what they faced, it's important we keep in mind that this is a real issue regardless of the community. In fact, sexual abuse seems to have no correlation with income level. Unfortunately, there are just sick and twisted people out in the world. But again, we need to understand this because being the victim of something so heinous is enough to push anyone to the brink, especially when they feel they have no other options, much less a 14-year-old whose mom is a junkie. Interestingly enough, outside of that, Michael is a well-adjusted kid for the most part. He seems to enjoy school and wants to spend time with his friends just like any other teenager, and even though his mom is an addict, he only seems to get mad at her for giving away their food and when Bug's dad comes back into their lives. He never complains about having to basically be the parent for his younger brother. Unfortunately, fate would put Michael on a crash course with his past and things wouldn't stay the way they were. Soon, two things happen that lead Michael to the point of no return. First, enter Marlo Stanfield. While trying to buy the love and respect of 10-year-old kids by offering them money for school clothes through Monk, Michael is offered money as well, but refuses it. When confronted by Marlo, Michael simply stares him down in silence. This is the first time we really see Michael make eye contact with an adult male, but when we look at Michael's eyes, they're dead. There's no emotion. This totally throws off Marlo. I mean, here is a 14-year-old kid who shows him nothing. Not curiosity, not fear, not anger, just nothing. At this point, Marlo is neither alive or dead to Michael. The second incident is the return of Bug's dad. As soon as Michael catches a glimpse of him, he goes into hyper-protective mode. He does everything he can to shield Bug. There is no hesitation, no fear, just pure protective instinct. These two events would start a chain of events that would eventually collide when Michael believes he has no other option but to make a deal with the devil and request help in getting rid of Bug's dad from Marlo. The trouble is, whenever one makes a deal with the devil, they're always on the losing end because the devil will always take more than what he asked for. This is a lesson Michael would learn the hard way, and once he starts down that path, there is no turning back. But let's backtrack for a moment and take a look at another scene that foreshadows Michael's future. In the opening scene of the episode Alliance, we see Michael and his friends talking about what happened to Lex. It's an interesting scene because we see the group of kids sitting semicircle and there is no one clear dominant person, though Naaman again is the one doing most of the talking. The conversation revolves around Chris and how he is a zombie master who turns dead people into zombies. This is the only time that Michael does not challenge what Naaman is saying, and Michael even says that there are zombies and they're probably spies for Marlo. Later that night, when it's just Michael, Randy, and Dookie, the group dynamics have changed. Randy and Dookie are at a table together working on a project, and Naaman is by himself in a chair not working but criticizing the others. Most notably, Michael is off by himself playing with a ball, though still part of the conversation. This is the first time we see Michael separated from his friends, and shortly after, Chris and Snoop appear. They force Michael's friends to leave with just the three of them to talk. Michael immediately shrinks into himself and refuses to make eye contact with Chris throughout the interaction, though he briefly does with Snoop. After they leave, Michael finds his friends, and as if someone snapped their fingers, he snaps back into his normal happy self who enjoys clowning around with his friends. So why is all of this important? Well, first we see Michael and his friends just being normal teenagers for once. No one really is the leader, and they're just trying to make sense of their world in ridiculous ways as teenage boys will do. They're snapped back into their reality as they hear gunshots go off, but right after they're back to talking about Chris and his zombies. It's a solemn reminder that these boys are living in two worlds. Later, when the four friends are together, Michael being separated from his friends symbolizes the beginning of the path he is about to go down, what it will mean and how it will affect him, especially considering that he is forced to be entirely isolated from his friends when Chris and Snoop show up. Michael's rock was his brother Bug and his friends. That's what made him happy. When he wasn't around them, his whole persona changed. When Chris showed up, he in essence begins the process of changing Michael into a zombie by further isolating Michael from his friends, and the more Michael interacts with the drug world, the more we see his dead eyes. The only thing keeping him from becoming a complete zombie, so to speak, was his friends, brother, and sense of morality. This is especially evident by the fact that as soon as he gets back to his friends, he began joking around and laughing almost immediately and carried on like nothing had happened. Unfortunately, everything comes with a price tag, and as Michael was now indebted to Marlo, he was ordered to kill someone. Interestingly enough, after the deed is done, Chris tells Michael no matter who he is or what he's done, you always look him in the eye. After that, we never see Michael shrink into himself or avoid eye contact with men except Omar. In a strange way, Chris was in some sense giving Michael some of his power back that his stepdad stole from him. Despite getting more involved in the drug game, Michael still backs his friends no matter what, especially Dookie and Randy. In doing so, Michael continues to show that he is cut from a different cloth than others. He never turns his back on Randy, and he goes out of his way to defend Dookie at all costs. While most people treated Dookie like a leper, such as when Naaman's mom wouldn't even allow him in her house, Michael offers Dookie a place to stay. When word got out that Randy was a snitch and was jumped after school, Michael stepped in and fought to defend his friend who was labeled a snitch without even a second thought or concern of how it would make him look. Michael doesn't hesitate to defend Dookie in front of Spider, even in the gym, which led to his fight with Naaman. There's not a huge explanation as to why Michael is so committed to Randy and Dookie. Obviously, we understand why he is so committed to Bug, but perhaps it was his sense of loyalty or maybe his moral code of protecting those who couldn't defend themselves. Whatever the case may be, it's clear Michael does not fear the consequences of doing what he feels is right. So what can we learn from studying Michael about the topic of leadership? As a member of the group, Michael never put himself above anyone else in the group, and in fact, he put the people he cared about over himself. Think back to when the boys attacked the terrace kids with water balloons filled with urine, which ended up with Michael catching a beatdown. When asked if he was okay, he simply plays it off as no big deal and then immediately asks if everyone else made it back okay. In the two scenarios mentioned previously with Randy and Dookie, Michael protected his friends regardless of how it would affect him personally. This is the mark of a strong leader. Many people want to be the king or be in charge because they think it's about power and accolades and being able to tell people what to do. It's not. Leadership has nothing to do with being in charge, but it has everything to do with how you help improve and better the people around you. It's about finding value in people that others find worthless. A good leader invests in other people, not just their own selfish wants. Second, a good leader doesn't tolerate BS, and they especially don't tolerate it from people within their own circle. We see time and time again Michael quickly calling out things people say, primarily Naaman, even when it's in a joking manner. The point is, he never really lets it slide. In one scene, after Michael turns down Marlo's money, Naaman asks him, "Why didn't you take it, Mike?" To which Michael responds, "That ain't me, owing people." Naaman, in his typical snarky manner, replies that he'd take it no matter what, followed by a high five of agreement from Randy. Michael, without blinking, asks, "Why? Your family got more money than any of us." Soon after, Donut pulls up in a stolen car, and the boys all crowd around and the topic changes to camping, to which Naaman makes a claim that Howard County has the KKK living in it, to which Michael again calls him out. Later, as Michael continues to develop within the Stanfield organization, he doesn't hesitate to call out his own people when they do something he doesn't approve of, such as calling out Spider for disrespecting Dookie or laying a beatdown on Kennard. Leaders maintain their respect by calling out things that are dishonest or disrespectful. Again, this goes back to a good leader understanding that unchecked BS can destroy a group. Now, at 14, did Michael know that this is what he was doing? Probably not, but it points to his natural leadership ability, charisma, and social dominance he has, which makes him special. Third, Michael never plays the victim. Despite his situation in life being just as bad, if not worse than the others around him, he never complains and never fails to follow through with what he needs to do. Despite being in middle school, he plays the role of big brother, father, friend, and student. Leaders never wear one hat. When people come to see them as leaders, they in fact many times become what's missing in that person's life. For better or for worse, while it can be a burden for the leader to bear, it's also part of the responsibility that comes with leadership. Fourth, Michael asked questions and he listened. Leaders know when to shut up and when to talk, and they usually do more of the former. Michael was a quick study because he was always trying to learn more. To someone like Snoop who didn't have the intelligence Michael did, someone asking questions was the same as talking too much. Ironically, she herself questioned some of Marlo's orders on more than one occasion to Chris, so it really had nothing to do with someone asking questions, it had to do with Michael asking questions. Finally, no matter what happens, as a leader, you need to be ready to walk away from it all no matter how much it may hurt you. Sometimes you might have to cut ties with someone close to you, but has become toxic to you and the people around you. Or sometimes you may need to move on because you're the one holding someone else back. Whatever the case may be, a leader realizes nothing is forever and everything has its end. It's sad to think that Michael, Dookie, and Bug were able to find some sort of happiness in the messed up drug world of Baltimore, and that Michael had to walk away from it to protect the people he cared about most. So taking all this information, what can we do with it and how can we apply it? If you're someone who supervises a Michael type, pay attention to what is important to them. Michael wasn't driven by power, and he wasn't driven by money. He was driven by his need to survive and help those around him who he cared for. It might not always be obvious, but understanding their habits and knowing who is in their circle can give some insight into what is important to them. You'll want to make sure that you take the time to build a relationship with them because they can be your biggest ally. The work you put in will pay off. Think of Presbo and Cuddy. Both of them saw potential in Michael and they almost broke through, but they didn't quite make it. So, how do you break through? Well, you don't just throw praise their way and expect them to follow you like Chris did. Instead, give them things to work on that they will benefit personally from. Just like Michael found use for Dookie when everyone else found him useless, as a leader, you need to do the same thing. I had a staff member who was this extremely shy, socially awkward kid. No one disliked him or anything, but he just didn't really have any friends because he never really talked to anyone. On the last day I left that job, I got a knock on my office door. It was him, and he asked if he could speak with me before I left. He sat down and asked me if I remembered the first thing I told him at the first staff meeting I held. I said I couldn't remember. He said, "You told me, dude, my goal for you is to get you to be more confident." He started to tear up and he said, "I really think you made that happen." See, here was a kid who went from a shy kid who wouldn't talk to anyone to someone who is now a staff leader, who everyone thought was the most valuable person on staff. See, underneath that shy, quiet kid was a person who was ridiculously smart, incredibly hardworking, funny, and had great leadership abilities himself. I remember when I'd see him walking around, I'd tell him, "Dude, shoulders back, stand tall, speak with confidence," things like that. Just little things I could do to get him to be seen as more confident in order to build up his self-image. Then, once that happened, I started having him do little projects for me, give input, and that turned into him participating in and leading parts of staff meetings to finally, by the time I left, he at the age of 18 knew what he wanted to do for a career and starting his own photography business. This was probably the most important and proud moment of my career. If Michael can find value in Dookie and I can find value in an awkward 16-year-old high school kid, who has value in your life that you haven't tapped into yet? Remember how we talked about how Michael was quick to call out BS and shut down anyone that disrespected him or his closest friends? Think of your work environment. Do you let things slide? Are you the type of person that lets people get away with saying negative things or even lying? Are you afraid to punish people because you're afraid others won't like you? Remember when Michael called out Spider? Did Spider stop working for him? No. What happened after he beat down Kennard? Kennard actually started to work for him later on. Leaders gain respect by being consistent and fair. Believe it or not, most people want a fair boss that isn't afraid to come down on people when they screw up, at least people who are worth a damn. When someone constantly asks you questions at work, what happens? Well, if you were like me at one point, you get really annoyed, especially if they just always want to know why. I mean, there were times I definitely wanted to just tell somebody to shut up and do their job and not worry about the why. But that was definitely a mistake. For many people to do a good job, they need to be invested in the work, and they can't be invested if they don't know the why. Again, this is why it's important to understand someone's motivations for doing what they do. Always think of someone asking you why as a way for you to educate them. You're helping them understand their role and how their contribution is important. If you don't do that, you can't be surprised when people are less enthusiastic to get things done for you. A final point I want to make is related to a scene where Presbo tells Dookie that since Michael skipped detention after school, he was going to get double next time. Dookie lets him know that Michael didn't skip but had to pick up his brother from school every day. As a leader, it's important that you know your people and what they're going through. It's your job to support them. Let's say you have a staff member that is always late on certain days of the week. Now, you could go to the route of telling them to figure it out or they're fired, or you can find out what actually is going on with them. Maybe the school bus picks up extra kids on certain days of the week so their kids don't get to board the bus until later than usual. Maybe the quality of an employee's work has slipped lately, but instead of criticizing them for doing a poor job, you ask if everything is alright because you notice they aren't doing the same quality of work you know they're capable of. Who knows what's going on with them, but you won't know unless you ask, which means you need to ask to be able to support them. This is the difference between a supervisor and a leader. When you go in the direction of a leader and you go to bat for your people, they will go to bat for you. Now, do you do this just because someone is late because they can't get out of bed on time? Of course not. But this is another reason it's important to ask questions and really listen. In the end, it wouldn't surprise me if Michael became just as much of a legend as Omar. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if early on people thought he was Omar come back to life. But ultimately, Michael is a guy that doesn't need the pack. The pack needs him. When he leaves, the pack scatters, and the pup with big paws also grows fangs and the lone wolf survives.